Hey guys, and welcome to October's House, the place where I make horror movies my entire personality. So, if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll probably have noticed I have moved. It's going really well. I'm really settled in here. I'm loving it. And I just feel a lot more comfortable doing things and getting stuff done, and it's just great. I'm really happy with it. It's the reason why I didn't upload anything in November, and it's the reason why I didn't get to finish my Halloween videos that I was really looking forward to doing. But we're all the better for it now. I do have some really cool stuff coming up. Going to be doing a Christmas horror video where I talk about some really cool Christmas horrors that you need to see, and I'm really excited to do an end of year thing where I go through every single film that I've logged on Letterboxd. I thought, for the end of year, New Year's celebrations, I'll chuck out the horror for a bit and we'll just go through everything that I've logged this year. So I think that'll be fun, and it can get a little bit stupid as well. So there's a little update on the channel, I guess. I did put out a community post in October, but we're a very small channel, so I just wanted to kind of give some context, So today we are doing a special video that I have been working on for a while. So a few months ago I did a Scream Iceberg and I had so much fun putting that together. It was probably one of my favorite videos that I've done, and literally just after I had edited that and put it out, I did a rewatch of all 6 movies, and I was kicking myself because I was seeing all these little details that I could have put in the iceberg, and I thought, what if I do another iceberg? And I just thought, no, that would be way too indulgent and just kind of stupid. But one thing that I did mention in that iceberg that I do want to dive deeper into is the theory that we're going to be covering today, and that is the Cult of Ghostface theory. And not only that, we are going to talk about how every single killer in the Scream franchise is connected. There are a lot of videos on this theory. It's quite a well-known theory. A lot of people talk about it in the fandom. It's very divisive, I would say, especially with some certain points of this theory. But what I don't see people talking about much is how each killer is connected, which to me is kind of the backbone of the theory. So I want to do exactly that today and talk about how each killer in the franchise is kind of connected, how maybe they got introduced into the cult, and who exactly is in the cult, because there might be some names that we don't maybe think of straight away. So I'll be giving a brief explanation of what the Cult of Ghostface theory actually is, in case you haven't come across it before and this is actually your introduction to it. And then I'll be breaking down every single killer and, the details and theorizing of how they are connected. I'm also going to be talking about some people that maybe haven't been officially revealed to us as Ghostface, or maybe haven't even been in the franchise on screen yet. Just to kind of give some extra context and maybe theorize a bit on where the future of the franchise is heading. So here is your spoiler warning for all 6 movies. I'll be talking all killers, all deaths, all movies, literally everything. I will even be talking about Scream 7. I haven't seen the leaks because I've been avoiding them actively. I want to be surprised when I go. But there is a lot of evidence for some of the stuff that I am saying a bit later on in the video, so I don't want to accidentally spoil you. Even if I'm guessing, I might be right, but just a blanket spoiler warning for everything. Okay, so what is the Cult of Ghostface theory? The Cult of Ghostface theory has been around for years and years, particularly after Scream 3, and that is because the original script for Scream 3 was exactly what this theory puts forward, and that is that there is a cult of crazy obsessed horror movie fans, particularly stab fans, all led by Stu Macher. As I said, this was actually Scream 3's original plot, and Stu was meant to be revealed to have survived the first movie, but they had to change it due to the Columbine massacre, which I think at this point most people know, and I mentioned it in my Iceberg video as well. The final act would be Sidney kind of walking into a house with all these kind of bodies strewn across the floor, and they would all kind of get up one by one and reveal themselves to be this big cult, and then Stu would kind of reveal himself to be pulling the strings killings of all the murders. Along with the general idea that Stu actually survives the first movie, this is a pretty divisive theory. I think you get some fans who are just undoubtedly and absolutely sure that this theory is correct, and then you get like other fans that just think it makes no sense. I am of the belief that the franchise as a whole is quite unpredictable, and I feel like if we think it might be going one way, there's always a chance that it could be going another way. I think that is pretty evident by what happened with Scream 7 and Melissa Barrera. I think if Radio Silence had continued their trilogy, I think we'd be seeing something a lot different for Scream 7, you know? So whatever we think is coming could be completely wrong. It could, they're always going to throw curveballs at us. So while I do think that there is quite a lot of evidence for this theory, if you read between the lines and pick out certain bits of dialogue, I do think that it could be revealed to us that this is absolutely not the case. As I've mentioned before as well, sometimes this theory kind of rests on whether Stu is actually alive or not. I personally think it works both ways. I think it works without him being alive, and I think it works with him being alive. I think that there is enough evidence for Stu to be alive. Whether or not they actually do it on screen is another question. I think that there are points of this theory where I will be talking about him as if he is alive and maybe what would happen if he wasn't, kind of showing both sides to the theory. So I think it's time we move on to our individual killers, and I will be going in a somewhat chronological order to kind of piece together a timeline, which means we will be starting with Roman Bridges. There's actually not too much to say about Roman because it's kind of obvious how this fits. He's the founder of the cult. He's the one that started it all. Roman Bridges is the original mastermind behind Maureen Prescott's murder. He recruited Billy and Stu, and he planned the whole thing with them. He is Maureen Prescott's estranged son and is Sidney's half-brother, as revealed to us in Scream 3. I think he fits pretty clearly into this theory. He was rejected by Maureen and wanted revenge, so he recruits Billy to do the murder, and in turn recruits Stu as the fall guy, and sets off the events of the entire franchise. As we've just spoken about, Billy was recruited by Roman to kill Maureen Prescott. His father was having an affair with Maureen, which caused his mother to leave, which kind of left him in a very vulnerable space, which allowed Roman to come in and manipulate him into getting revenge on Maureen Prescott. As I said, he was very easy to manipulate and very vulnerable, and that is how we have our first cult member. And then Roman advises Billy to get a fall guy, and that leads us to I'd like to think that if Stu did survive the first movie and is still alive, he would be the leader of this cult. Stu is easily one of the franchise's most iconic characters. Matthew Lillard is incredible, the love for him is endless, and rightly so. Stu was Billy's best friend. He was a bit weird, a bit quirky, so he was kind of the perfect fall guy. But from Stu's perspective, he was never told he was the fall guy, just that they would be doing the murders together. I honestly believe that his motive was literally just for fun. There is actually another theory out there that Stu was actually in love with Billy and that's why he committed the murders with him, but for this, we'll just say that it was for fun. As I've said, I think this theory can stand with or without him surviving, but we can theorize that his rich parents managed to maybe pay off the police to fake his death and then have him in hiding this entire time, where he's kind of been pulling the strings and maybe recruiting for the cult. So with all of that in mind, his original plans fell through, his best friend died, and he now has a renewed hatred for Sidney, possibly fueled by revenge. And who else is fueled by revenge? Nancy Loomis, of course. Now, do I believe that Nancy Loomis went on her killing spree because she was indoctrinated into the cult? No. But I do believe that Nancy Loomis wanted revenge on Sidney for killing Billy, and the cult was just a really convenient way for her to enact those plans. And Scream 2 is actually the first mention in the franchise that we get of any kind of killers communicating or finding each other online. And I personally think that this is where the cult does most of its recruiting. I think that there are a lot of mentions of online spaces where killers have kind of communicated and spoken. I think that that is the crux of the entire theory. I think that there are places on the internet where the cult is operating and recruiting and actively communicating. So she finds this crazy movie guy online, offers to pay his tuition to get him to help her get revenge on Sidney. Because this was like an older woman in a time where the internet was only just becoming an accessible thing. So I do believe that she might have gotten some help from the two people that were working with her son. So as I just mentioned, Mickey Altieri was recruited by Nancy Loomis / Roman / Stu over the internet, but it was his idea to actually do the real life sequel killings. I think that if it wasn't for Mickey or the cult, I think that Nancy would have just targeted Sid and Gale. Mickey is a film student, he's absolutely batshit insane, and he kind of falls into this category of Ghostface killer that is just like obsessed movie fan, which quite a lot of them turn out to be, which honestly makes him ripe for the cult. There is one thing about Mickey I will admit does kind of put a spanner in things here though, and that is that he was actually intending to get caught because he wanted to be infamous. I don't think that necessarily changes much in terms of his recruitment into the cult, but I do think that the cult wouldn't really want to risk him telling people about the cult once he was caught, because he was quite open with his intentions. So we're moving into around the time of Scream 3, and we've already talked about Roman, but there's one person that we haven't spoken about, and that person wasn't technically a confirmed Ghostface, but I think the evidence piles up against her, and that is of course Angelina Tyler. I think that there is quite an overwhelming amount of evidence that she was the second Ghostface, including the fact that she was supposed to be the second Ghostface before they rewrote it to only have Roman's reveal. And I think that she gets stabbed in the shoulder and then just dragged off screen. We don't see her die. People in the franchise have survived way worse. So we're just going to work on the assumption that she is alive and she was the second Ghostface. Angelina Tyler was someone who was absolutely obsessed with Sidney. She idolized her, and she was in fact Roman's girlfriend. So I think that it's really not that far of a stretch that she was kind of brought into the cult just by proximity, really, on account of her obsession with Sidney and her connection to Roman. She's kind of like useful, you know? I think it would just make sense. So I think Jill is actually quite a difficult one to place into the cult, to be honest with you. So we will be making some assumptions to kind of make this fit a bit more. In the movie, Jill is Sidney and Roman's cousin. She is sick of the constant talk about Sidney. She's jealous of the fame and she wants it for herself. She decides to plan a second Woodsboro massacre, and she gets a friend Charlie in to help her out and is planning to frame her boyfriend Trevor to kind of parallel Billy a bit. However, she was always planning on killing Charlie because she wanted to be the sole survivor and she didn't want to have a Randy. The fourth film does put a lot of emphasis on internet infamy and filming the murders to post them online, and I think this is where we can kind of draw our connection in. I don't think Jill was so online or necessarily that into movies that she would have just kind of being able to connect with the cult on her own. So I think that there are two kind of avenues that this can go. One possibility is that Stu found her himself because he had maybe been fed information about her feelings towards Sydney and thought she'd be really easy to manipulate and exploit. Or Charlie was the one to find the cult online and kind of fed them information about Jill, and again they exploited her or brought her in willingly. Either way, either her feelings were exploited by the cult to enact the massacre without her really even knowing, or the cult gave her resources to kind of play out the fantasy that she wanted. So Charlie Walker, the next 5 killers on this list all kind of fall into the same category as Mickey. I think it's pretty safe to assume that Charlie, being who he was in the kind of same boards and same chat rooms as Mickey, albeit a lot later, but they definitely were running in the same circles. Charlie was a massive movie fan who seemingly only needed a little bit of a push to start killing people, with a lot of these killers. A movie nerd with a predisposition for murder is the absolute perfect candidate for this cult. I do think that he found the cult online, maybe fed Stu some information about Jill, as I said, which then led to the second Woodsboro murders. Now, I'm not saying Charlie was a mastermind, far from it, but I do think that he was a perfect candidate for this cult to use for their own purposes, you know? Richie Kirsch. So Scream 5's killers to me are actually the most obvious and perfect example for this theory. I think next to Scream 3 there's a lot of evidence planted in 5 and 6 to kind of back this theory up. Richie was a crazy obsessed Stab fan, and so much so that we find out in 6 that he made his own fan films. In Scream 5 we are told that Richie met Amber, his accomplice, on the Stab subreddit, and while I do think that that is true, I think that it's easy to assume that it went a bit deeper than Reddit. Like, I think, yes, they met on the subreddit, but they're not going to stay on Reddit talking about killing people. Do you know what I mean? I think that there was more to it than we were led to believe. Same with Charlie, same with Mickey. I think that Richie was in the same circles that they were all in. The cult. I think he was very easy to kind of bring into the cult and indoctrinate in because of his already obsession with Stab. His motive was to recreate the original Woodsboro murder killers and create his own Stab 2022 that would rival the first Stab movie. If you haven't caught on by now, movie fans are fucking crazy. Honestly, Amber is probably one of the best Ghostfaces in my opinion. Mikey Madison is just fucking iconic. And there's one line that she performs so perfectly, and I think it kind of encompasses the theory as a whole, and I think it really was radio silence playing in our faces a little bit for some of the plans that they had for the future of the franchise. And of course, I'm talking about when Amber shouts, "I was radicalized." Firstly, I think the way that it's just delivered is hilarious, but I think secondly, it's that they're just telling us straight up that, like, you know, she was indoctrinated into a cult. And, like, yes, she was just saying it to kind of get out of being killed by Sydney and Gale, but I think that that was a pretty big kind of nod to us, you know? So Amber was groomed by Richie when she was 17 years old. I think there's an extra layer of ickiness in this pairing, but you know, if we disregard that, their main motive was to just kill a bunch of people, frame Sam because they knew that she was the daughter of Billy Loomis, and that was all under the guise of doing a requel. Exactly the same as Richie, I think they were both kind of drawn in and indoctrinated into the cult through the online spaces that they were in, and where the kind of cult does most of its recruiting, as I've said before. I don't know what else to say about this. I think it's so obvious that this is what they were setting up in this movie. And if it couldn't get any more obvious, we move on to Scream 6's opening. Jason Carvey had 10 minutes of screen time and just said, okay, let me heat this up. Scream 6 has such a great opening. I mean, Samara Weaving is kind of an incredible, like, opening kill. And then on top of that, we get a Ghostface reveal before the titles even hit. Please. I remember being in the cinema, and when he took his mask off before the movie had even started, I turned to Jack and I was like, oh, they're doing the cult. They're doing it. They are doing it. And I was like so hyped. I was like going crazy. And then obviously it turned out that they didn't fully reveal it. I just think Jason Carvey and Greg, who we will talk about in a second, was so clearly part of the cult. It's one thing to have a set of killers every movie that have like a big, grandiose motive, you know, for doing a massacre. But to have, like, subsets of killers, it just screams cult to me, you know? To have, like, two college kids that are just kind of off doing their own little plans, that, like, it just... In New York as well. Like, they're not even in their hometown. They're not, like, you know, following Sydney around. It just screams cult to me, you know? So they were planning to do their own set of killings to finish Richie's movie. I don't think Jason was like best friends with Richie, but I do think that they were maybe closer than we were told. I think the way that he speaks about Richie over the phone in the opening, you know, yes, he could have found out his name and his motive from like news reports on, you know, online or whatever, but I just feel like the way that he was speaking kind of made it sound like they at least knew each other, you know, or like even if it was like just acquaintances. So Greg is probably the one character that we have officially seen on screen that we kind of know the least about. As far as we know, he didn't actually kill anyone, and when we do see him on screen for like literally one shot, he's dead. So you can't really call him a Ghostface, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't in contact with the cult, and he was at the absolute minimum ready and planning to kill. I think that him and Jason were both kind of indoctrinated into the cult, you know, along with maybe like Richie and Amber, and I think that, you know, they were young and dumb enough and obsessed with movies enough to kind of just be successfully brought into the cult quite easily. And Greg and Jason were clearly like unsuccessful, and that is on account of our next Ghostface. Quinn Kirsch. So we're at Scream 6, and I do think it's important to keep in mind the direction that they were taking the meta stuff in like kind of Scream 5 and 6. Scream 5 was a requel of the first film, obviously, and then Scream 6 mirrored Scream 2. So I fully believe that if Radio Silence went on to make Scream 7, that Scream 7 would have mirrored Scream 3. I think there's a few ways that they could have done this. I think the first one is quite literally have them just make another stab movie and be on the set of that stab movie. I think secondly, they could have tweaked that idea a little bit, and instead of them making a stab movie, it was a true crime documentary, and that would have played into some commentary about the true crime phase. Or thirdly, they could have gone really, really meta, and instead of paralleling Scream 3, they could have paralleled the original plans for Scream 3. And that would have been a Cult of Ghostface being revealed at the end of Scream 7, with maybe Stu Macher pulling all of the strings, and revealing to us that all of the killers have been connected this entire time. Now, if we keep that in mind, Scream 2 and Scream 6's motives are exactly the same. Mrs. Loomis wanted revenge on Sid for killing Billy, and Wayne wanted revenge on Sam for killing Richie, as it's revealed to us that Wayne was Richie's dad all along. I think with Wayne, along with Nancy, he's one of the two killers that kind of use the cult for their own motive rather than the other way around. Unlike Nancy, though, I think that instead of just finding a random crazed movie fan online, or, kind of being in touch with Billy and Stu, I think Wayne actually used his kids to get in contact with the cult. I know that was a bit of a long way around to get to that point, but I think that it's important to note what intentions Radio Silence could have had for the future installments, and how that kind of would have give us more context into this theory. Because even though Scream 7 has now changed and we're not getting Radio Silence's story, I think what they set up is still important and still will be utilized in some way. So next up we have Quinn Kirsch. I think it was pretty obvious at this point that the entire family was kind of like off the rails. I don't think Quinn needed much push to become a killer. I think the grief of losing her brother would have led to her trying to get into contact with the people that Richie was in contact with, which would then in turn help her dad conduct his plans for revenge on Sam. As I said, I think this was an instance where Wayne was kind of using the cult for his own purposes rather than the other way around, and had Quinn kind of go in and get some intel from the cult about his son. And with Ethan, I do think that his connections to the cult and motivations are foundationally the same as Quinn's. I do think he was the entry point to the online spaces where he could find the cult. And I think that he was doing all of this just to get his dad's approval. Because I don't think his motive was necessarily revenge. I just think he wanted his dad to see him in the way that he saw Richie. So I think what we get told about Ethan and his motive is kind of face value. I just think that his connection to the cult is hidden behind it, So that takes us through all 6 entries in the franchise with all kind of known or speculated ghost faces and how they're connected to each other in this group of besties known as the Cult of Ghostface. However, I do have 3 more characters that I think could fit into this theory. 2 out of 3 of those people we've never actually seen on screen, and 1 out of those 2 people I think has quite a big chance of showing up in Scream 7. So, let's get into these little bonus ones. So, I wanted to talk about Kirby Reed first, because honestly, this is not one that I am fully sold on. I personally don't think that Kirby is a killer, or I don't think she is part of the cult, but I thought that it would still be fun and interesting to present this as an idea to you guys. Kirby being a killer is actually a theory in its own right. Kirby was thought to be dead until the 6th entry. She was attacked by Charlie Walker, and we were made to think that she had died in the massacre. And it was only in the 6th entry we find out that she actually survived that attack. And honestly, that kind of lines up with 4 of the killers. So we have Stu, who is heavily theorized to have survived the first movie. We have Angelina Tyler, who got stabbed in the shoulder and dragged off. And we have Quinn, whose death was covered up and then revealed to be a ghost face at the end of her movie. So I feel like Kirby being thought to be dead for 3 movies, or 2 movies, after being attacked and then revealed to have survived it, kind of lines up with some of the other people on this list. She is a horror buff and even states at the start of Scream 4 that Sydney is the reason for her love of horror movies. Sounds pretty familiar, to be honest. As I said, I don't quite believe that she is a killer or was ever supposed to be a ghost face. But the evidence is there. You can make the argument. And there was even a moment in 6 where we were supposed to believe that she was the killer. So while I don't think that this is actually the case for this particular person, I do want to kind of put this idea out there and maybe put some extra building blocks into this theory, is that Kirby was killed by Charlie Walker. It was staged because she was actually part of the Scream 4 murders. She was friends with Jill, she was friends with Charlie, I don't think it's that big of a stretch when you kind of lay it all out. I think that she was recruited into the cult with Charlie and Jill. And I think after Charlie and Jill's death, she continued to be part of the cult, using her alleged attack and her surviving that attack as cover, and then going on to join the FBI, gathering intel for the cult. I mean, you know what? I might have just convinced myself. I might change my answer and say that Kirby is actually part of the cult. Okay, so first of the two that we haven't actually seen on screen, and that is Christina Carpenter. She is the mother of Sam and Tara, and during the third Woodsboro killing, she was on a business trip to London. She is sus as fuck. Christina was in school with the group from the first movie. She actually cheated on her then boyfriend and later Tara's dad with Billy Loomis, leading her to become pregnant and giving birth to Sam Carpenter. This was kept from the family, but Sam actually found out when she was looking through the attic for Christmas presents at the age of 13. When Tara's dad found out about this, he left and cut off contact with Christina and the girls, and this led Christina to blame Sam and turn Tara against her. It's said that Christina was very absent and very distant, and she struggled with addiction, and she was away from home a lot on business trips. She seemingly kind of had almost a second life away from Tara, and there was mention of a mystery man that she was kind of keeping secret. At this point in the video, I don't even know whether I need to say it, but I think Christina being in the same school year as Sydney, having a relationship with Billy, kind of being absent a lot, and having like a mystery man, it just all kind of adds up. I think that her relationship with Billy might have been a little bit more than an affair, and she kind of felt quite a lot for him. I think that she was very close to Billy, and I think that she might have, you know, kind of been around for a lot of the murders, not necessarily in like the same location. I just mean like close to Billy during that time. And I would even go as far to speculate that she might have been part of Maureen Prescott's murder. I don't think she was part of the first massacre necessarily. I think she was sidelined a bit, and I think that allowed her to get away with her involvement in Maureen Prescott's murder. And I also think it's why we don't see her in the first movie. And let's talk about that mystery man. I think that it was framed as maybe like a secret lover, but I actually think that she's just been in contact with Stu. Now, knowing that we've never actually seen her, I do think that she was not that involved in the killings much past Maureen's killing. But I do think that she was still very much part of the cult in maybe like an admin capacity, or like, you know, like a recruitment kind of capacity online. I think if Radio Silence were continuing their story, I think we would 100% be seeing Christina in a future installment. And it would be revealed to us that she had more involvement than we thought. I think it's still a possibility now, but I think it's a lot less likely now that Sam and Tara are out of the picture. I think that, you know, maybe we'll get some information about her revealed to us, but I don't think it'll be this big reveal as it probably would have been if Radio Silence had stayed on. And finally, we are here at our last alleged cult member, and that is Leslie Macher, sister to Stu Macher and mother to Vince Macher, or I think his second name actually might have been something different. But yeah, Leslie Macher. She has never been seen and she has barely been mentioned, but babes, whether or not this theory is true, I think that we will be seeing Leslie Macher in Scream 7. We know next to nothing about this character, only that she is the older sister of Stu Macher and had a son called Vince. If Stu is alive and the cult is active, then I think that it's not that far-fetched to say that Leslie would be aware that he was alive. And even if he wasn't, I think that there is motive there. I think if Stu is alive, she could have been indoctrinated in purely for the fun of it. Maybe she's just as crazy as Stu is. And I think she could be using the cult to kind of conduct these murders under Stu's guidance to keep the spotlight off of Stu. So he stays hidden and people don't start suspecting that he's alive, which they have in universe, and we know that because of the conversation that Mindy had with Carvey. If Stu is dead, I think that she could kind of be doing it with the motive of legacy and making sure that Stu didn't die for nothing and that the chaos keeps on, you know? I think this is a hard one to pin down because I think there are a lot of different ways they could go with it. You know, she could have been aware of the murders and not really been a part of it. Or, you know, she could have been a part of it, we just never knew. She could have been part of Maureen's killing, just like Christina. You know, it could go so many different ways. I personally think, though, that if we do see her, I think her motive will be of revenge. I think she could be mad at Sydney for tarnishing the Macher name by not having their plans kind of go the way they wanted, you know, and Sydney killing Stu. You could make the argument that she has been using the cult the entire time to get revenge on Sydney. I think it's worth noting as well that I've seen a few theories floating around about Scream 7's kind of motive and ending, and that she will appear in Scream 7 and that her motive would be more of like ending things. She's sick of the murders, she's sick of the legacy, she's sick of the stab films, and she's sick of Stu's infamy, so she wants to burn it all down, which would kind of line up with the trailer. I wonder if we were kind of going to fit that into the cult, would it be that she's tired of the cult and she wants to kind of end it all, almost like a mutiny? As I said, we just don't know much about her, so there's so many different ways that they could take her. And, you know, she might just be an ordinary woman that just happened to have a serial killer brother. But it's Scream, nothing's ever that simple. I do think we'll see her in Scream 7, and I do think that Anna Camp is playing her, as most people seem to think. So there we are, how I believe every Ghostface killer is connected through the cult of Ghostface. I think if we were to say that this is true, and this is actually where the franchise is heading, I don't think that they would kind of drop this as one big bomb. I think that they are going to like really like kind of drip feed us information over a couple of films and then just like, you know, kind of slowly get to like a reveal that kind of like boils over rather than just hits in one go. And I think that that drip feeding has already started through 5, 6 and 7. So I think in 7 we'll get a lot more information about the cult, or hints. For maybe a cliffhanger at the end for us to go into 8 where they actually officially reveal it. As I said, this theory does take a few assumptions here and there, but I think overall there is a lot of evidence for this theory, and I think that the fact that Scream 3 was supposed to be what this is means quite a lot. And I think that Radio Silence were kind of planning to do this. And with Kevin Williamson coming back for Scream 7, you know, he's done the following. He knows how to do cults. I don't know what else to say. Let me know if you feel this way. Let me know if you think this is actually bullshit and like nothing that I just said makes any sense. We'll have a conversation, go into a bit more depth in the comments, and let me know. Give the video a like, make sure you subscribe for more content and all of that. My next 2 videos are probably going to be the Christmas video and the New Year's video. And then in January, I should be doing something with Insidious. I've got 2 different Insidious projects that I'm working on, and I'm trying to figure out which one to kind of dive into first. Okay, see you in the next one.